welcome back to the SHIELD Armory. I am Chaplain Hughes, and I'm here with Chaplain Stephenson and Chaplain Potter, and we are excited for you guys to be joining with us today. Hey, guys, welcome back. Excited about another episode. Are you guys ready?
Oh, yeah, man. This is I've been ready for this one for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very excited to unpack some really important topics on this one.
Yeah, so we have been the last, the last 3 weeks, we've been talking about relationships. And so we decided to kind of take the next week into that in a little bit different way. This is our first interview with someone we're excited to say is not just any random person, but somebody that we know and who's also an officer. And so we thought, man, it would be great to bring him in and hear his take on what we want to talk about today in this world of relationships. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to let him introduce himself, tell you who he is, a little bit about himself, about his family, and then we're going to dive in. So let's go, man.
Hey, everyone. I'm Jacob Underwood. I am a police officer for Roanoke City. So I know y'all very well on that. I am a father of 2 kids, 2 girls. One's 2, one's 6 months. Wife that I've been together with for now 12 years. And I actually am a police kid by heart. My father has been a city employee for 25 years of my life and then retired and came back. And now I get to work with him. He's a detective for cold case. So David Underwood is his name. And I'm thankful to be here.
Man, isn't that crazy? So you've grown up as a police kid, and now you're a police officer.
Yeah.
And now you have your own police children,
Yes.
So, just kind of having some fun with that. But, it's the tide has really come around for you and all of that same thing happening in your life. And so that's kind of what we want to talk about today. We want to kind of dig into some of that. And, why don't you just kind of give us some sort of general idea of what it was like growing up with your dad as a cop?
Yeah, so just to kind of throw this out there, I'm a 11-year officer now, and I was on patrol for 9 years of my work career, and so now I'm a community resource officer, so it's a lot more building relationships, engagement, programs, events, things like that. So going out in the public more, and so you see it, and police kids come up a lot on that. And so growing up as a police kid, you kind of come into that knowledge that your name is no longer something that you're just writing on homework or on a test. It's actually a name tag, and it carries a lot of substance, and it can be very impactful depending on the circumstance. And so for me, at a very young age, I was able to know that everything that I did now being an officer is under a microscope, even as a kid. And sometimes that can be very hard. But born and raised here in Roanoke, my parents do fall into the statistic of divorcing when I was very young. But the fact that they were able to cherish a relationship that was sturdy enough to bring me through and give me a wonderful childhood, it definitely helped, because you know that relationships in law enforcement just struggle there. So, yeah, it's growing up as a police kid. It's challenging, but it also carries impact.
Yeah. And I think one thing that's important for people to know, and I don't know if everybody knows this statistic, it's not just in law enforcement, but in our general population, the current statistics show that 1 in 2 marriages end in divorce. And you brought it up and you said that, that's a very difficult thing within law enforcement. We see that at even a higher rate within this community, and part of that being just the job and all the things that come along with that. And so, what was it like for you and your family when you were growing up, with your dad and what he did as his career?
Yeah, so knowing that they divorced at a young age, it was a lot of times I was with my mom during the week and my dad on the weekends when he was off. But I think growing up, it was hard and impactful that he was never at any of my sport games. But it was always remembering that there was something important that he was doing in the back end to make me realize that, hey, he may have not been there for that really good game, but at least I get to talk about it when I get home with him. And as a kid, especially in high school, I would fake the being sick just so I could have those few cherishable moments, whether it was lunch or whether I could get him away from work enough for us to go back home and he could take care of me. I started doing that a little bit, but other than that, yeah, challenging challenging.
So the real question is, did he just find that out for the first time when he listens to this?
I think so.
So, Mr. Underwood, your son faked sick some days just to go to lunch with you, just so you're aware.
Just to go to Famous Anthony's and have the number 9.
If I could guess, your dad is a very smart man.
He already knew this. He already knew
I'm going to go with this is not the first time.
Yeah.
That's
been
probably
aware
very
of
true. That's probably very true.
Yeah, how do you get somebody over on a seasoned officer and a detective? That'd be a hard father to try to get some over on.
And I'll say this, having been in the city, the RPD circles for some 15 plus years now, your dad's name came up a lot. So he wasn't just the run-of-the-mill detective, like your dad, bit of a rock star in that world. So absolutely, he was on to you. But I'm sure he welcomed spending that time with you as well.
Yeah, even the little time that I've been in Roanoke City so far since I've started and trying to get to know people there, and I have heard your dad referred to as the living legend. Is what I've heard people say when his name comes up.
And what's funny is a lot of these things that we're going to go through today, I'm gonna throw that out there that even in some of my answers, he did nothing wrong. He did everything so great. He's still today my hero, and I think that's really when I say that it was challenging. It wasn't challenging as a sense of physical. It was more emotional. It was more of the challenge of knowing that I have to grow up in the shoes of a legend, knowing that everyone knows him, that camaraderie that I saw, the brotherhood very early on, that he had a really good certain set of skills that he did extremely well. But I think that that's really what piggybacked me wanting to be an officer and wanting to do that at a very young age.
And I think, too, and we can probably dig more into this a little later and into some of the things we're going to get into today, but it's one thing if you guys are in different departments, but you guys ended up in the same place, and so that takes a different form because, I like you, I consider my dad my hero, and when you look at somebody as a hero, you feel like you got tremendous shoes to fill. And one thing somebody told me one time is you can't fill anyone else's shoes, you just have to wear yours and do with yours what you can. So let's unpack that just for a second. You said it, my dad's my hero, he's, and you guys again ended up in the same department. You realizing that you wanted to be a police officer, backing up to your childhood till then, how did that affect you going that direction, and how did that really catapult you into that?
I love that word catapult because it definitely was a very easy choice for me, knowing that I wanted to make an impact with whatever career I chose. But at an early age, I was always running around in that same uniform. And Roanoke City is known for having that one uniform that's just stood around for so many years. And, going through the changing of our patches now. But I still actually have a few of my shirts that I have in my locker that I wear specifically for events that were his that I was wearing when I was 7, 8 years old, playing cops and robbers with my friends. And so,
man, that's cool.
So you have uniforms right now in your locker that your dad wore.
Yep. And he doesn't know that.
Yeah.
So those were things that I kept. So now he knows that. But it's one of those things that I wanted to be able to carry those things and remember and kind of guide me a little bit. Right. And so it really is a passion of mine to have that and to hold on to those. I was hoarding them for so many years, but now I actually get to use them. And so it's a really cool full circle there. So
Wow.
So when you first started talking, you talked about as a kid, and we can identify because our kids are pastors' kids.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever my knuckleheads do reflects on me in my profession pretty strongly. Mm-hmm. And in law enforcement, it is much the same. And you explained early on, and your tagline was, it wasn't just my name, it was more of a name badge that I wore.
Yep.
And it sounds like you realized that your name was tied with something a little bigger and that your actions were tied. Talk to me, before we get into the unpacking the shirt thing, talk to me about what that was like growing up as a kid, realizing that I don't have the freedom to fail, probably like my counterparts, because of how it reflects on my dad as a public servant.
So there's two sides, a dark side and a good side. And the good side is that you fit in to that category of the Roots. And what I mean by that is through several events and just through several times of going into the police halls, you understand that there are some other police kids out there that are very similar to you, and so you grow up together in these things. But that was something that I cherished, is going to that Christmas party, and whether it was at the ice rink or whether it was, going into the hallways and seeing them, it was always really satisfying there. And knowing that when you make a decision, when you make an impact, whether that's good or bad, and he comes running in, you're either going to have to answer to what you just did, or you can actually be really happy about the choice that you made. And so there was choices, good and bad, that had a lot of weight to it. And then you get to the bad side, and that is I struggled outside of that police family to fit in school. And so early on, I categorize it in my trauma as bullying. I was bullied a lot, but it was more or less that I never got into fights. I never had any of that, but I was always pushed to the test to see how much I could endure before he came running, before he would be there. Would I speed when I was 16 years old in a Mustang to show off for my friends before he was there? Would I be able to do this or carry out this task before he came coming? And I think that's one of those things that it was really hard for me, because I always wanted to do the right thing by him. But to fit in for those friends, I had to make that split decision. And that actually turned into my motivation to being a police officer today, is those split decisions, those impactful ones, is the things that I saw him do at a young age that I knew I wanted to be a part of. But that bullying led to a lot of depression, a lot of the ability to not see eye to eye with myself. I still struggle with it today, is that what I'm looking into the mirror to see is I try to go back to the days where I could see him. But I think the reason I have those uniforms and I wear them is to remind myself that when I was 8 years old and I just felt like a Superman, I felt like my dad in those moments. It's what carries me on through that. And so it was a very big struggle as a kid growing up when it came to those moments of fitting in. However, the impact and the weight of those decisions when you did right, it was wonderful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think every father would love to hear their son say, I looked up at my dad, and I'm aware that he's not a perfect man, but I aspire to walk in his footsteps. And I'm looking over at Darren, and he's weeping, and his eyes are leaking, and he's boo-hooing. The fact that you wear your dad's uniform is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. You can do that with honor. From what we've heard, that does come at a cost. As you said, there was both good and bad in that. There's both a positive side of accountability that maybe your friends didn't have, that when you show your tail a little bit, that not only you're going to get in trouble, your dad is the arm of enforcement for the government. So if that happens, I'm going to get busted twice. You're going to get hurt once, I'm going to get hurt twice. And that is a hard thing. But it sounds like that has been redeemed so much so, and how your dad navigated that made you want to step up into that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Thinking about that, what would, and we're kind of jumping around a little bit from our agenda, but I know there's going to be people that are listening right now that are officers and they have kids, and the weight of that badge oftentimes extends to the home. We're aware that our calling, we don't serve a 9-to-5 type job where if it burns, so be it, I'm not at work right now. Think back to the riots in Roanoke in 2021. Just brutal 2020, 2021, that bad era. When the city was burning, all the officers had to be at work for almost a month straight. And you don't get the ability to just check off. And that does wear on a kid. And you were mentioning missed games and missed opportunities. And yeah, you can relate to my dad has a calling, my dad has a purpose, but That still hurts a little bit. Can you just unpack for us, in light of that, what should some of these officers that have kids, what should they be thinking? What's some of their mindset?
So starting at a young age before I get to where I am now as a father is something that my dad did extremely well, is when he did get those call-ins as a detective and being in Vice for so long, he would explain the importance of what he was about to go and do. Even if it was at 3 o'clock in the morning and he had to wake me up, he was never gone without me knowing why. And that there is what allowed me the strength to be able to close back my eyes without the fear of him not coming home. As a father now, it's the same thing. As he did something so well, and that is he was always that light. Whether we were at Famous Anthony's, whether we were at Kroger or at the movie theater, there was always that one person that remembered him. Dave, Detective Dave, it was good seeing you. And it's funny because he always had the ability, before he even walked into those doors or I got into his truck, he was not at work. He was never at work with me. And that was the thing that I truly still carry over as something that I learned very young that got me through a lot of that, is I let work be at work. And I catch myself sometimes looking at my emails and checking in with a few of my partners and seeing how they're doing. But I remember the impact of what it had to me when he was able to put it down at the door.
Wow.
Well, I know. Oh, go ahead, man.
I was just going to say, it reminds me, there's a missionary who was killed in Ecuador decades ago. In his journal, he wrote these words: "Wherever you are, be all there." It's my daughters know that well. I've said that to them often. In fact, they've turned that on me. If there's been times, my daughters are grown and married now, but there have been times when I've been together with my daughters and I pulled out the phone and I was looking at my phone. They're like, "Hey, Dad, wherever you are, be all there." And so they turned it back on me. But it sounds like your dad, even though he was called out by virtue of the job, the position he's in, and we all get that. But when he was home, he was home. So wherever you are, be all there.
Yeah.
That's huge. I'm actually going to carry that with me for a very long time, because I've never been able to actually capture it in a sentence like that. Something that more like a quote, right? Mm-hmm. Be all there. Oof. That's powerful. Thank you for that.
That's a big deal.
No,
It's a really big deal that your dad, with the legend status that he carried, was able to turn that off. That probably didn't come natural to him. That was probably something that he had to fight. So kudos to him for fighting that battle. Many officers, and I will say this kind of pluralistically, across the board, will struggle with their identity, their calling, and their purpose is in a uniform. And it's hard to have that strong of a purpose and that strong of a community and an impact, and then come home to craziness and kids and nasty diapers and dogs, and they don't make that transition. It sounds like your dad really did well with that.
And if it didn't, he might be listening to this and he might say, "Oh man, I struggle with that so much." The thing is even if he did, I never knew.
Yeah.
And he hit it so well. And I think that's where it was, is I feel like he didn't have to hide it, because it was just him. It was his identity. It was those things, but it's that ability to say, "I'm a father today," that I think really, truly catapulted me, using your word, a lot as a kid.
Yeah. Let's talk about call-outs for just a minute. For those of us sitting around the table that have been in the pastoral world, for most pastors, call-outs are a weekly experience in that type of environment. There's hospital calls, there's traumatic events. So when we did not interact with the police department, our profession required us to be on call 24/7. So while we have never worn the badge and the gun and understand that, our families do understand that reality. Mm-hmm. Now stepping into police chaplaincy, I think that has kind of put some grease on those skids, if you will, to where our families now understand that this line of work, I got called out last night to an incident with one of the departments we serve. And so it's just a normal thing to go to a house and have a bag packed, if you will, so that you can respond back to work, or make sure that you're at a place where you can double back and grab your uniform and head back in. One thing that has been very helpful, and maybe this is for the spouses that are listening that have that other counterpart that are punching out and pushing back into work for call-outs. One thing that we heard from a seasoned pastor's wife that my wife adopted and was very life-giving to my family was when Dad left, when I was at the table and I got a phone call and my face dropped and I said, "I love you guys, I'll see you later." That shakes their whole world up. My world has just been shooken up because we've had an officer that's been injured or something, some critical incident has happened, so my mind goes right there. They're left with an empty seat and a half-eaten plate of food, and that's hard on them. They don't have that normal routine. They don't know what's going on, and I can't fully share that trauma with them. That's not theirs to carry. And that would be hard on my wife. And what she would do is often be like, "Wow, your dad had to go to work again." That is true, but that is also a very negative way to put that on our kids. And so a seasoned pastor's wife used to tell us that what we should do, and I've seen her do this. As I came out of the bedroom, dressed, ready for work, I would see it. She would grab the kid's hands, and she would hold them and say, "Hey, something has went wrong to where your dad has to respond to. Why don't we pray for that situation? I don't know what's going on. Sometimes Daddy can talk about it, sometimes he can't. But let's just, while we have to stay here, let's pray for him." And so what that does is that lets them partner with me in my call out. And that packages it a little different instead of, "Oh man, he's just running around again." So I would just encourage as the spouses, I can only imagine, I've never had someone that has ran out on dinner with me and been a call out. I've always been that guy. I've just seen my spouse do that so well. So maybe try that. Maybe try to package that a little different. I don't know if you want to add to that, Darren.
Yeah, my Melanie, my wife, would do that often with our daughters, and of course you have to do that in age appropriate ways and that kind of thing. And they wouldn't share all the details about what was, I wouldn't share all the details of what I was stepping into or that kind of thing. But I tell you, having now, my daughters I have twin daughters that are soon going to be 25 and they're married and all of that, but they are still very interested in what I'm doing as a law enforcement chaplain. Still to this day, there are situations that I'll shoot them a text and say, "Hey, I want you to be praying for this situation that I'm stepping into right now." And my daughters they believe in, I think because of how my wife would pour into them and kind of hold down the fort at home and kind of explain what was happening, it was a positive thing, so much so that to this day, my daughters will pray actively for SHIELD. They will contribute financially to SHIELD to see that I can continue doing what I'm doing. And so that's a good point, Gareth. I'm glad you brought that up, because I know it's tough on spouses, on the kids when dad gets called out. It's a tough thing, but yeah, as the spouse who's at home, as the parent who's home with the kids, you can frame that a little differently and then actively be a part of what's taking place and actively, make that a positive thing.
So since we're on that, nobody gets this thing perfect, right? And dealing with this, we're all learning, we're all growing, right? What's it like, since we're on this topic of call outs, man, what is that like in your home? Like, cause obviously, you can't do the line of work you do without that happening. Like, it just is what it is. It's just it's a nature of the beast, right? So what's that like in your home for you and your family, where you could speak into that for other people as somebody who's actively dealing with that now in their life? What's that like for your family?
This one's going to take me a second. It's probably one of the most powerful questions we had on the agenda, but it's the one thing I still struggle to this day that has brought the most relationship hurdles, is what I'm going to say, with me and my wife. And that is, I'm so easy to take that call or that text because that's what I want. I want to be able to get called out because I'm going back into what my identity is. And knowing that I already struggle with that internally, that shirt and that badge is all I have. So a lot of times what I have found is putting it on as like a necklace, as like a chain, putting it in my pocket. It reminds me that I can still be that person, but I need to be a father today. And Gareth, going on to your point, it's what I call the power of the IOU or the rain check. And my wife knows it all too well as I'm sorry. We always get told never be sorry. But I say it constantly. I still do to this day. And the most important thing is when I do say that, and I give my speech of the importance of what I'm about to do, and even to my girls that probably are at that age that really don't know yet, it's starting to create that muscle memory, and that is, Daddy's got to go help someone today. Daddy has someone that needs to do what he does best. Someone needs help out there making a decision, and you have mommy today, but they need me. And to get home and to not shy away into that vice, into that alcohol, or into that what we call silence, where we're living with what we just did, whether it was truly actually helping someone like you told them, or making a decision that unfortunately affected their life from here on out, is to let them in and at least just give them something when you get home. And I've struggled with that the most is because I get home and I always change the subject. I always want it to be happy because sometimes it is sad. But to just give them something of what you just did, you forget about the fear that they had of you not coming back, or the want of being able to take that hurt or to take that pride in what you just did very well. And I'm glad you asked that question because it's probably one of the most impactful. And knowing my father was a man of few words, he always did that very well. And sometimes I wonder if he was just playing into once upon a times. But the fact that I never had any fear of him coming back, it wasn't a testimony of how good of a detective he was. It was how good of a father he was.
I think that really goes back to when your dad was home, he was there, right? And so I think that goes into the reality of the importance of being present when you're home. Because, we guys, how many times do we say to officers when you're home, be present? Don't just be a body. Be all in. Be there with your family. Be a dad. Be a husband. So that in the moments that you have to do the call-outs, they know that's my dad.
Yeah.
And they can not only, Gareth, what you're talking about, maybe pray for you when you're there, but they anticipate and look forward to you coming home because they know dad's going to be all in when he's home, Yep. And then not just for the kids, but for your spouse as well, because it goes both ways. It's got to go to everybody and not just the kids. It's got to go to your spouse as well because, they're the ones that's been there since the beginning usually, and so, and they're the ones that understand more than the kids understand.
Yeah.
I learned from a legend very early on in my career, and it's now being a father where I actually understand that those words were so powerful, and that is to give them something, to let them know the weight of the badge, gives them something to hold on to because they don't wear it every day. But they are the ones that, not wearing it, feel a lot of the support, what they're doing when you're gone, and the things that they have to pick up when you go out. And I never really knew those words, but to give them a piece of it. You don't have to show it. You don't have to give it to them, but to give them something of that weight, whether it's just words, some affirmation here or there, or whatever that is, let them in. Let them into the weight of that. And it actually may result in taking a few pounds off.
While you were mentioning that, was struggling because I think of an incident in my home that will forever mark and shape me in the area of call-outs. My little girl is named Lydia, and she's 6, and she is just the most precious human. And I didn't grow up around sisters, so women were a little strange to me when I first got married and moved in with Courtney. I was like, "What are you? Like, what is this that we call women?" So, and my little girl is just a full-grown woman, just shrunk, and so that's been an adjustment for me. And she loves and cares, and just to see things through her eyes, though. I remember one night, and we all remember this night. It was a pretty rough incident in our police department where an officer was hurt in a line of duty. And I remember putting my uniform on, and my mind was 1,000 miles from my house. And I was spun all the way up. And I went in, and I remember, I can take you to exactly where my daughter was playing on the floor. And I knelt down and I said, Daddy has to go to work. It was on a day off, and so I had to tell them, hey, I'm not going to be here tonight. Dad's got to go to work. And I'll forever remember her looking up at me and saying, what's going on? And I said, age appropriately, one of my friends got hurt tonight, and I'm going to have to go to work. And I'll forever remember that little girl looking at me and saying, my leg hurts, Daddy. Will you stay? And I immediately realized right there what she was doing is I had cost her. My profession, my punching out and helping other people. She said, well, I got a problem too. Would you stay home with me? And I carried that all the way into the department. And it taught me that those call-outs that I want to run to, I want to be helpful, I want to help my friends. I got 3 kids and a beautiful wife at home that do have hurts too. There's several hundred people now that call me for critical incidents, but it's those ones at home. And I saw that through her eyes. Another incident with her specifically, I came home and I'd actually worked a little bit with you that week, worked in Southeast, and we had a pediatric fatality in that area, and was called to the scene of that incident and ended up going to the hospital and making a notification, and just an awful, awful day in my line of work. And I came home, and I remember all the way home, I didn't listen to music. I just tried to decompress from that. I remember opening the door, and Lydia looked and just stopped. And she said, Daddy, are you okay? I was like, maybe I just had a rough day. She said, come sit down. So I walked over, and she sat down, and she just started scratching my back. And she said, have you ate today? I was like, no, baby, I haven't. She said, oh, hold on one second. So she went and grabbed, I don't know where she got this pizza from. I don't know if it was like from the couch or like garage. But that was the most treasured piece of pizza I've ever got in my life. And she said, here, eat this.
Yeah.
And what I again realized is that I can bring home the traumas of my world, and I can lay them at my kids' feet. And it's hard on them. But in some regards, as you just said, it is good for them. It's good for them to see. And again, age appropriate. We don't need to.
Yes.
They did not decide to carry a badge and a gun or to be a police chaplain and walk behind you guys. But they do give of you. And so it's very, very helpful to unpack that. And it sounds like, again, we started out this podcast with interviewing you because you're a second-generation officer. So what things did you see? What things are you doing? And how are you interacting with that in mind now? And it sounds like your dad had a pretty good imprint on your life and it gave you some footing to help you navigate those struggles.
Yeah, and it was the ability to separate. And what I mean by that is to separate the good and the bad. I'm gonna let them know the good, age appropriate, right? Show them the pictures, tell them the stories, but then separate it from the bad. And he did it in such a good way where it was always good and evil.
Yeah.
Most of the time with his knowledge and his upbringing and mine as well, he would carry it into the Bible, where the Bible also is filled with good and evil. And he always tried to do that so I would have something. But even in the bad, to understand that the good guys always win was just something that he would always talk to me about, and he would always explain to me. And it was something that took away the fear, but I think also in his mind would let him release from it, even if it was an officer getting injured or this or that, because he lost several of his friends through his line, and he was able to say, but the good guys always win.
Yeah. That's awesome.
While we're talking about kids and our families, I think, let's just be very clear, they didn't sign up for this job, either being a police officer or doing like what we do, like Gareth, like you were talking about as a police chaplain. But at the end of the day, that's my wife refers to our family. She always tells my kids, this is our home team. And she said, we have to get our team right here before we can get our team right anywhere else. She always tells our kids that.
Amen.
And so one of the things that I've tried to do with my family is exactly what you guys are talking about. I try to loop them in on what's actually happening in my day-to-day. Just recently, I was just sharing with Darren before we started recording today, what really horrible day. Something extremely traumatic happened. And the person it happened with, my family knows. And but my kids didn't need to know details. But I picked my oldest daughter up from school at the end of that day and I actually texted her because I was running late to pick her up. And I texted her and I said, it's been a horrible day. Or I said, I'm running late. I said, I'll be there as soon as I can. And she said, is everything okay? I said, no, it's been a horrible day. I'll explain more later. And she got in the car and she said, Dad, what is going on? And so I'll use the same word you guys used, in the most appropriate way that I could, shared with her some of the things that happened in my day. Because what that allows all of us to be able to do, regardless, again, they're not working the jobs we're working, but they are part of our home team.
Yep.
And they need to be a part of what makes us successful, what officers successful, what makes what we do successful, is that we have that support system of people that are in on what we do and back what we do. That's a big part of how we do what we do.
It's also so important, as parents, we often, as parents, we want to protect our children. We want to keep them safe and shield them from things. But certainly what I have learned through the years and I didn't have sons, Gareth, you mentioned having Lydia and now, what do I do with this? I've got a little girl now. I'm really good at brushing dolls' hair and stuff like that. I have two daughters.
Yeah.
Gareth shares these stories of being out hunting and hanging in a tree by a saddle, next to guys in a tree stand or something. And I'm like, well, I know how to brush a doll's hair, I guess. And
I just got fussed at. I've been taking my kids to school all week. My wife's like, you got to brush all of her hair. You just can't, all the way down to the bottom. Like, start there. Like, we had to have a lesson on how to do that. I was like, my hair's half an inch. Like, I don't know. So it's different.
Well, it's just to circle back just a little bit with this. We have to allow our children to experience some of these things with us. It's how they learn. It's how they grow. It's how we can help teach them that, hey, life throws curveballs. There is evil in this world. There are bad things that happen. but we can navigate these things. And certainly in our house, with God's help, with his guidance through his word, we have what we need to navigate these things and walk through these things. And when we allow our children in, again, they don't need to know all the nitty gritty. And it needs to be age appropriate, as we've said several times. So I want to be clear in that, but we have to allow them in so that they can learn how to overcome challenges, and they can learn that there's ways forward when bad things happen, and we will pull together and share each other's loads. When our daughters come home, we need to be on the listening end at times. When our children come home and they have something, we want them to be able to talk with us. If we're not sharing some things with them, what example are we setting?
Yeah.
Very true.
We've kind of gone off script in a good way, I think, with this podcast.
Yeah.
One thing I want to bring up, and then maybe I'll ask you two questions as an officer with kids and as a kid of an officer. We've hit all around it, but we'll probably close with just asking you those questions. One of the things that for those listening that maybe are officers, that you have kids at home, you have a spouse at home, you have those that you're interacting with on a daily basis that are not law enforcement. One thing can be really damaging is that you think you're winning that war and you're losing. So I can look at my life in my introspective box and saying, hey, I'm not checking CAT all the time. I'm not looking at my emails. I'm present. I'm a hero. One thing I found helpful is to loop those in that are in your inner circle and say, hey, how am I doing with this? Am I present? I may think, hey, I'm parking the car. I'm taking the uniform off. Dad's home. Like, let's roll. But then you see it from their eyes and they say, but you're pretty distant. You're quiet. You're present, but you're not actually here. You're 100 miles away. Yeah. And I go, well, I've been home 4 hours. And they'll go, nope, you sat in your chair for 4 hours. And so just be prepared for that. But again, if you think you're dialed in on that area, maybe just reach out and ask them. The two questions that I would have for you, Jacob, and where we can't answer, we have not been we've not been an officer, and we've not been a kid of an officer. What would you tell kids if there's a child? We know that there was some younger adolescents, some youth listening to the podcast, some of the first episodes. What would you tell that kid whose parent, mom or dad, was an officer? What would you speak into their life?
I would first start that by saying it's okay if they're not always there. Something that I had to learn and something that I grasped very early on is a song by Lone Star, and it's I'm Already There. That song to this day still hits me really hard, is because they don't always have to be present. Now, and this isn't challenging what you just said, but they don't have to be at that sports game for you to know that they're there with you in spirit. And it's okay that you can't tell them your report card on the way home. But it makes those times where you're able to share those things so important. And just like a father or a mother that is an officer going back home, do that same love. But also as a kid, let them into your day. Don't shade them off just because they weren't there when you got home. Just because you had to make your bed and they weren't able to do that. Just because you had to make your dinner because they weren't there to do that. Let them into your playbook. Because maybe letting them into your playbook opens theirs. And I have found that that's one of the truest things that I, again, still struggle with, right, is showing my playbook. And even for a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old who don't always share those things right now because, the age there, it's not always just, hey, Daddy, look at this. It can be a smile when you need a smile in the darkness that you just went through.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be just going in, getting into the bed and just cuddling just for a few minutes, even though that they're asleep. But as a child, it's talk. Something that I struggle with so much is that I was always wanting to listen, but my dad, being a man of a few words, sometimes I had to pry. And being silent is just going to make you realize that one day you turn 18 years old and you're no longer in that house. You no longer have the ability to ask those stories. And not everyone is a good narrator of their own book, right? And something that I struggled with is I was willing to give them the cover and I was willing to open it up, but I wasn't willing to stop or to start after the once upon a time. And it's sitting in your recliner, just rocking back and forth, just waiting for that text message or scrolling through that feed to give you a little bit of adrenaline watching some officer videos. But as a kid, the one thing that I needed to remind myself is don't stay silent. If I had a question about their job, if I had a question about what my dad did or what he was doing, I always asked.
Yeah.
And it's okay if they say, this may not be a good time for me to tell you that, but to go into something else and to bridge into another conversation, being silent is what I struggle with the most. Is because now as a father, I wish I would have asked all those plays. I wish I would have gotten into that book a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because I know my father as a cop and as a living legend, I know a lot of those plays. But what do I do when she's crying, Dad?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you get them down to sleep when you just went through so much darkness?
That's huge.
Yep.
I think, kind of paraphrase what you're saying, sometimes as a kid or kid of an officer, your mom or your dad has just been the hero for 12 hours. And I was just talking kind of offline with you about some of the calls me and you ran together, and pretty traumatic stuff that we did side by side. How do you go home and how do you play Legos after we just saw several people die that day?
Mm-hmm.
How do you flip that switch? And so sometimes I think they would be sitting and they're just trying to figure out, I don't know how to download this. I don't know how to tell them that I'm struggling a little bit or that I'm good and I just need a minute. So the fact that you said approach them, ask them, that may actually help them. So that's awesome. So to ask you one final question, we've asked kind of what would you speak into the life of a child or a kid or someone whose dad or mom's an officer. What would you say to an officer who has a kid? You're kind of unique on both of those categories. So what would you say to mom and dad?
I would tell them that exactly the opposite of what I would say to a kid of an officer, but as a officer who has a kid or is a parent. Hughes, you said this so amazingly, and when it comes to the sports element, they're your team. Don't let them become your fans, because your team are your greatest fans. And something that I struggle a lot with is I only knew my team as the guys that I worked with every night. But I struggled in the team that I had at home that kept everything up when I was in the uniform or at work. And, the ability to, even if it takes all of your being to just tell them that one story or to at least just get down on the ground and, play Legos for those few minutes, even if you're just working through, breathing techniques or just ways to get those thoughts out of your mind, to do something is so much more impactful than doing nothing. And sometimes our nothing is going and getting the alcohol, going and getting the dip, going and getting all of those vices. But let let your family be the ones that you go to. Let your kid, let your wife, let anyone who is there at home when you get there be the one that you go to. Because I can tell you right now, being an officer for 11 years, I would be lying if I didn't tell you that 10 out of those years, and even still to this day, I struggle with not being Officer Underwood when I walk into that door. But what about Jacob as a father?
Mm-hmm.
What about Jacob as a husband?
That's good. It's good advice from both perspectives. And I hope if you're listening and you're a child and you're looking up at a hero, whether it's mom or dad, that you can give them some of that space and begin to allow them to unpack some of that stuff with you and ask them. And hope too, if you're an officer, whether you're mom or dad and you have kids, hope you can hear from Jacob's perspective just how impactful that can be. So
to be able to grasp onto two things that I have learned here in the last few months is don't make promises you can't keep. It's okay to have a rain check or an IOU, but don't make promises to them when you're leaving the door, when you're going to work. And then the second one is it's okay to just surrender at the door and to ask for God for a little bit of assistance.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because maybe you don't have the power to do it yourself.
Yeah. That's one of the most powerful things I've ever heard, man. And obviously the three of us don't understand a lot of that weight. We get to walk with you guys, but we're not walking home with that same thing. But it's so important that we sit down and we have these discussions and we have these conversations, because we weren't made to do life alone. We were meant to do life in community, and we were meant to learn from one another and to help one another. And that's what moments like right now are all about.
Yeah.
And that's why
That's right.
stories like yours are so important, man. And we can't thank you enough for being willing to sit down and have this conversation. I know that if people were sitting here at our table right now and looking at the paper that we have here, we went long and hard off of that. But that's the nature of when we get into talking through personal stories, man. That's just what happens. But I think what was said today absolutely is what needed to be said. And I really hope our prayer from SHIELD is that this would speak into your life, whoever is listening, that you would find hope, that you would find maybe even some joy from the things, and maybe some things that would transform you and transform your family. That's what we want to see happen. Because again, this is a wellness initiative for the whole family, not just for individual people.
Darren, something that I would really like to ask you that has been so beneficial for me is knowing that I struggle with going home, and sometimes I struggle to take off that uniform. I struggle to take off those boots. It's when I said a second ago that surrender. Something that truly helps me is years ago you gave me a prayer card. It has two sides. One's yellow, one's white. The yellow one's going into work, asking for strength. And then the other side, my A side, the good side, is when I'm going home, just being able to let it all go. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you might be able to share that, but when I tell you that that's the most powerful piece, a physical thing that I can hold on to, it helps me.
Yeah, I'd forgotten I'd given those out a number of years ago, but it's a card. I still have one in my console in my car, and probably a good idea for me to print up some more of those and give those out. But on the it was a prayer just to be like cut free from the evil that I'd interacted with, and even as a chaplain, especially when I would do those ride-alongs. And before I stepped out from my car to go in my house, I would take the time to just say, hey, God, thank you for allowing me to take part in this chaplaincy that you've allowed me to, or this job as an officer, this career. God, thank you for what you've called me to interact with, but I confess that the weight of the things I've interacted with, the evil that I've interacted with in this day is more than my humanity can bear. So God, please just remove the sting of the things I've interacted with from me today. And just any place that has been impacted in any way by that evil, would you just breathe life into me? Would you grant your peace? And then, God, I just pray that if there's anything that I've interacted with that has tempted me to just fits of rage or anger or lust or those other things, God, just remove that from me. And as I go into my house, that I would be free to be the dad, to be the husband that you have called me to be, that I want to be. Is a prayer along those lines. Now, those words are a little different. As I talked with you, I think when I gave you the card, like, this is just kind of a guide, but don't let that limit you, and just use it as a springboard to pray about other things or in your own words kind of thing. But yeah, that's important. I'm glad that's been so impactful for you all these years.
Yeah, it was something that you gave us when in the academy. In the academy, you came in, and obviously the class that you and your wife do for the families of, and a lot of that. And then afterwards, my first lineup, you gave me one of those, and 11 years later, it's still in my best.
Wow.
So
That's
thank you for
awesome.
that.
So I think the realization today is it's time for us to print some more of those prayer cards.
Yeah, I think so.
Absolutely.
Especially after this.
Amen.
So, well, Jacob, thank you, man. We don't know how to say thank you enough for these moments. So thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for making the time. Thank you for just being willing to not just speak to us, but to speak into the lives of so many people who will be listening to this. There's no way we can say thank you for that.
And there's no way I can say thank you enough for asking.
Yeah.
Because that was huge.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you for letting me have a seat at this table.
Happy to hear your story, and hope that those officers that have kids can kind of glean some really important things they can take back home. And also for those the kids you spoke into their life. We can't do that. Our fathers weren't officers, but thank you for speaking into that, and we're grateful for that.
Yeah.
Same.
Well, guys, I think this is a good moment to close everything out. It's been an awesome time together, and I'm really looking forward to the next. And we're looking forward to more opportunities like this. And so I would just throw this out there. If you would be interested, we're always looking for opportunities to speak with officers, and we have a lot of different people that we're going to be reaching out to over a long time that we plan on doing this. But if you would be interested, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. We may not know that you'd be interested unless you reach out to us. So, but we will have a new episode coming next week. So we hope you'll come back and join us. If you would, follow us on whatever platform that you listen on. Give us a rating and give us a review. That helps get us out to more people. If you know somebody that this episode could help, we'd ask that you would share it, because it could be impactful for people who don't know about the SHIELD Armory. But otherwise, we look forward to seeing you back next week.